I think.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. And so I want to welcome everyone tonight to our discussion on PMDD, which stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And so I want to just start by sharing the screen. For some introductions. Are we good on the screen? Okay. So I will be hosting the event tonight. My organization is called Life Coaching by Andrea. And so I help people talking about wellness, empowerment, and mental health education. I offer workshops and I do individual coaching as well. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and I've actually worked in mental health for about 24 years. I also have been teaching along with the life coaching. So actually, I'll add that later. Our first speaker is Dr. Lindsay Fitzpatrick. She is a clinical psychologist and executive director. So she has been practicing for over 15 years and specializes in chronic pain and illness. She also has a master's in business administration. So she is a very busy and very talented gal. So definitely we are very lucky to have her. I was very pleased that she agreed to join us. We also have a very special guest, Marybeth Bohn. She is vice president of the Christina Bohn Foundation, which raises awareness and advocates for PMDD. So she has a story that she will share with us about her daughter, Christina. And so we will get to that in just a little bit, but she has spoken at universities, in government. She's done conferences, so she has a lot of experience and a lot of information to share with us. So our next speaker is Dr. Jessica Wiener, and she is an LPCC-S. She is licensed and has her own outpatient clinic counseling services. So she does specialize in women's issues such as PMDD. And she was also a presenter at the Yale conference, which is where I virtually met her and Marybeth. And our next speaker, Shannon O'Mara. She is a certified peer recovery supporter and a counseling trainee. So she has definitely has some very important experience working through the 988 Lifeline, supporting individuals who have suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts, domestic violence situations, trauma. So she has a lot of experience and did some research with Dr. Wiener, which she presented at the conference that we were at. We hope to have Rachel Fox, who is an author. And so I'll share a little bit more later about the book that she has available as a resource. But she wrote this book as a way to talk about the emotional suffering that she experienced and how she hopes that can help others as well. So what I did want to mention, let me just pause for 1 second to do an admit here of people in our waiting room. Okay, so we do have, as a reminder to everyone, that 988 is the, Shannon, is this the lifeline that you work for? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So I always do like to make sure that everybody is aware of this when we do panel discussion. So if there's any information that you want to take with you that you know is available, this is one resource. I also will be emailing resources to everybody that signed up. So anything that we'll be talking about tonight, you're welcome to take a screenshot because I know that can be easily accessible. But I also will be emailing out more resources as well. So with that introduction, there we go. stopping our share. And so um, what I want to do at this point is just go ahead and jump in with our first speaker. So we have Dr. Lindsay Fitzpatrick, and she's going to be talking about what is PMDD. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Fitzpatrick.
Thanks, Andre. So premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD, is a condition that is really misunderstood, as we're going to go over tonight, even though it affects millions of people. So I want to start by just distinguishing this from PMS, right? People think we're, being dramatic, or that it's just bad PMS, which is premenstrual syndrome. Premenstrual syndrome can, as a woman, you might be bloated, tired, have headaches, food cravings, these types of things. And while it might not be pleasant, that usually the symptoms of PMS are manageable, and to the point where they don't really interfere with your functioning day to day. Whereas PMDD that we're talking about tonight can be much more severe. It affects your emotional health, your mental health, physical health, and well-being, to the point where that then interferes with your daily life. So it's recognized in psychology as a depressive disorder, which can impact, like I said, work, school, relationships, and generally just your overall sense of well-being in your life. So the actual disorder itself is linked to the hormonal changes that occur during the menstrual cycle. And it's a little bit confusing because it's not that we have abnormal hormones. And so you can test, regularly with an endocrinologist, let's say, for estrogen or progesterone. It's really thought to be that the individual is more sensitive to the shifts that happen in your hormonal balance throughout your menstrual cycle. These hormones can also impact, serotonin, which is responsible for your mood, which is how we end up with these, really depressive type symptoms as well. So the symptoms will usually begin about 1 to 2 weeks, average of 10 days or so before your period actually starts, and then can improve a few days after menstruation begins. This window is different for everybody. And so this is why, tracking becomes an important way of dealing with it, but we'll get to that later on. So then the symptoms then can be really extreme. They can be mood swings, irritability, anxiety, sadness, hopelessness, which is what makes it, a pretty big indicator for suicide, right? Where we start to get into the self-harm and suicide stuff is women that feel, really hopeless or stuck in their symptoms. It can also impact sleep, appetite, as well as the same, some of those same physical symptoms of PMS. I think one of the most important things to understand, like I said, is that it's not just bad PMS, right? That these symptoms can be quite severe. And also that they're really difficult to talk about for a lot of people. There's a lot of stigma just in our culture altogether about talking about your period, right? We just don't, it's like, oh, we have to buy tampons, right? So people get really sort of uncomfortable talking about these symptoms, or the things that might impact, how you're feeling day to day. But it is treatable, which is fantastic. And we'll talk a little bit later on about just my personal experience with getting treatment and and how successful that can be. For some folks, it's as easy as, they're not easy changes to make, but as simple as lifestyle changes, eating, sleeping, these types of things. But there are also medications that can be really helpful, both hormonal medications or ones that impact mood directly. As well as, of course, behavioral therapy. There's a couple of us on the panel tonight that are therapists. So with that, we'll move on to misconceptions about PMDD. And
Dr. Fitzpatrick, can I ask a quick question?
yeah.
If someone is concerned or worried that this might describe them or a loved one, what is your recommendation for a frontline provider? What kind of doctor or provider should they go see?
Yeah, so I would recommend tracking it so you have a little bit of data to take to your provider. And then I would go, to a GP who will help you get in to see an OBGYN, right? So they might be able to talk to you about this. Um, that's one. In my opinion, it should be like a no wrong door kind of way, right? Like your therapist should be able to identify this, your psychiatrist, your GP, your OBGYN, your like all of these different folks should be able to identify this. The problem I think that I've run across is the misunderstanding of it, right? And so it might require a little bit more advocating, right? So if whatever first doctor you go to is like, no, that's not a thing, or we don't believe in that, which unfortunately still happens, to get a second opinion.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to move to our first lived experience speaker. So we have Rachel Fox. We're very lucky to have Rachel. And like I said, we'll talk a little bit. I'll talk a little bit more later about her book and share that information, but I'm just going to kick it on over to you. Jump
Hi,
on in.
everyone. So I'm the speaker who confused the time zone change. So I thought it was 3 p.m. And so here it's 9 p.m. And so I'm taking it for my car because we're on a family vacation. So forbid the background, no, sorry for the background, but I'm so grateful to be here. Hi, Mary Beth. It's really great to see you, and Andrea to meet you, and the other speakers. Um, my name's Rachel, and for nearly 25 years, I lived with PMDD without knowing that it had a name. So, month after month, I experienced overwhelming rage, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, intrusive thoughts, and emotional exhaustion. I spent years wondering what's wrong with me, and maybe I was born this way. It wasn't until one desperate day that I typed the words rage before a period into Google. And that search led me to PMDD. And that was the first time I'd ever seen those four letters together. And I realized I wasn't crazy. I had a real diagnosis. And that diagnosis was just the beginning of my journey, but it wasn't the end. And one of the greatest turning points came when I hit my rock bottom. During that season, I felt like um, I was really crying out in desperation to God like never before, for answers like never before. And I jumped into every Facebook PMDD group that I could find. And I spent like a Google rabbit hole of just trying to figure out like what was this, who she was, how, who was this person, what did I have in common with her. And while I joined all of these groups, I also felt very overwhelmed because the last year of that time before I Googled rage before a period and self-diagnosed myself with PMDD, I had tried everything that was being recommended in the groups. But I kept looking and I kept searching for a cure or for healing. And someone in one of the groups recommended rapid transformational therapy known as RTT. And it was the first time then that I heard those three letters, and I went into searching what that was. So there's a powerful connection that I, for the first time, began to learn between the brain, the body, and my past experiences. Through RTT, which draws from principles of neuroscience and neuroplasticity and cognitive behavioral therapy, I began to uncover the beliefs, the emotions, and the memories that shaped how my brain responded to stress and emotion and to my luteal phase. I realized that my luteal phase wasn't creating all of these emotional pain responses from nothing. They were coming from a place deep within me. They were amplifying old wounds, fears, and limited beliefs that I had stored for years, or mostly all of my life. One of the most powerful concepts for me in RTT was understanding neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to create new neural pathways. During the RTT process, I was simply revisiting old memories. I was intentionally replacing old limited beliefs with healthier, life-giving ones, such as times that I had my luteal phase was desperation of like, I'm not enough. I hate myself. I'm not good enough. I'm not safe. I'm not seen. I'm not heard. And during the RTT process, I was able to really change those beliefs and rewire them. And as I did, my beliefs began to change, my thoughts began to change, and my thoughts changed, my emotions changed, and my behaviors changed. That meant that my luteal phases changed. And over time, it literally changed the absolute direction of my life. That experience was so transformative that I became trained and certified in RTT. And then I eventually wrote my book called From Cursed to Cured to give hope to other women, maybe like you, walking through PMDD. Over the years, I've also come to appreciate that while medication can play a significant role in our lives, it's so important that we combine holistic approaches so that we can understand and consider how the brain and the body, emotions, lifestyle, relationships, and for those who also desire a spiritual life as well, all create a really holistic, well-rounded approach. I grew up in a Christian home, so scripture was always a part of my life. And during the healing journey, a verse really came to mind after I understood what neuroplasticity was. And there's a verse that says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And it really, really blew me away because it was as if these biblical principles were always pointing back to neuroplasticity. And it was the brain's remarkable ability to form and to change and to readapt and to be renewed. So the idea of renewing my mind wasn't just a spiritual metaphor, it reflected to me my healing journey of PMDD. So today, I don't claim to have all the answers, and I know that every woman's journey is very different. But I do know this is that PMDD is very, very real. But I do believe that there is hope because I am one of the survivors. And I'm very, very thankful to say that I could be on the other side of all of the pain and everything that I experienced. Healing can take many forms, but you should never stop pursuing all the tools, ask for all of the support, ask for all the treatments and all the options from all of your providers, because together with support, you can find wholeness and healing.
Rachel, I appreciate so much that you were here, that you took the time out from your vacation. And later, when I talk about resources, I did drop the link of your book into the chat, but I'll go over it a little bit more once we talk about resources. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so we are going to now hear from Dr. Wiener and Shannon talking about misconceptions about PMDD.
Sure thing. Thank you again for having us. It's an honor to be here. I think a place to start was Dr. Fitzpatrick transparently already covered this very well, so I'll just very briefly go over this first point that we have. But a large myth or misconception about PMDD is that people equate it to PMS. And the reality is that, and I'm speaking from a lived experience perspective as well, is that this is PMS times 100. And I think that's essentially, Dr. Andrea, what you stated when we were doing our talk through the Yale conference, is that that's essentially how you equated it. And
I do say PMS on steroids is how I call it.
yeah, okay, that's better. I misremembered. But yeah, it's so much more, and our other misconceptions will go more into that, but it is PMS on steroids. I stand corrected.
Okay. So another big misconception is that PMDD is just all in your head. It's all just emotional and mental. But it's not. There are physical pieces to it. There are physical symptoms that, yes, they can show up in PMS, but they're much more debilitating in PMDD, such as the cramps, the bloating, the headaches, migraines, GI problems such as IBS, different nutritional deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies, chronic fatigue syndrome, all of those physical things that are often overlooked as something else. And I'm sure that'll be talked about a little bit more in the misdiagnosis piece. Um,
Absolutely. And to piggyback off of that for just a moment, like from a lived experience perspective, like imagining like migraines and cluster headaches and the suffering coupled, this physical suffering there coupled with intrusive thoughts. Like they do not call these things suicide headaches for nothing. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful in any way, but that is just, it's so true to think about how much pain some menstruating individuals are in when they're experiencing this. And that goes well into the next point of PMD being rare as a misconception. About 2 to 8% of menstruating individuals experience PMDD and are diagnosed with PMDD. And another perspective we, as holistic clinicians and people, should think about is the idea of menstruating individuals. And when I say that, we think, stereotypically cisgender women. There are still people who may identify as male or non-binary who are maybe biologically female who still have to go through this as a part of their life and transition. And so just thinking about having that wide net of compassion for everybody who might experience PMDD. And I see that Dr. Andrews said, yeah, 3 to 7 days, same. So I feel you on that.
yeah. Um, Another misconception is that it's not very serious, which is completely the opposite. Whereas, PMS, these symptoms are much more common, they're much more controllable and treatable. PMDD causes significant suffering in individuals, including the increased suicidality, inability to regulate themselves and their emotions, sometimes leading to different body image concerns. Other mental health symptoms can increase as well. So, coupled with the PMDD, if there's a history of other things like anxiety and depression, then those symptoms tend to get worse during those times as well.
Absolutely. And to finish us off on a one more quick point, um, that this is something that women and menstruating individuals just have to live with. And that is not the case because there are so many treatment options, hormonal treatments, counseling, RTT, like Rachel said, seeing OBGYN, psychiatrist, but also understanding that not everything works for everybody in the same way. And there's different things like medical trauma that can impact one's decision to go seek certain treatments. So just being mindful and compassionate about that.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're going to move right into our second lived experience. So I'm going to invite Marybeth to jump on in and start.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this evening. It's very important, and I'm grateful you're doing it. My husband, Steve, and I founded the Christina Bohn Foundation in memory of our daughter, and we choose to stand before audiences and revisit the hardest days of her life and our lives with the hope that others will receive a correct diagnosis much sooner, and so that another family might be spared the heartbreak that we have endured. Christina was the valedictorian of her university school of nursing in 2010. She became a thoracic ICU nurse. She was a classically trained vocalist and pianist, a devoted wife, the mother of two beautiful young children, a leader in her church. She was known for her kindness, compassion, and love for others. For about 15 years, Christina believed she simply had unusually severe PMS. Like so many with PMDD, she became remarkably skilled at masking her suffering while continuing to excel academically, professionally, and personally. But that would change. Eventually she got to the point where masking was impossible. During and after her second pregnancy, she experienced perinatal depression. And after about a year after her baby was born, what she believed was severe PMS became much worse. Then COVID-19 brought isolation and the loss of many of the activities and relationships that had helped sustain her. During the final year of her life, her illness escalated dramatically. Anxiety became panic attacks, suicidal thoughts became suicide attempts, and she experienced periods of delusional thinking. We would later learn PMDD is a spectrum disorder, and as time wore on, she was no longer able to mask her symptoms. In October 2020, Christina came home to stay with Steve and me for what was supposed to be 2.5 weeks while she recovered from 11 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy, which had been prescribed because it was thought she had treatment-resistant depression. Instead of staying 2.5 weeks with us, though, she stayed 1 year and 3 days. When she arrived, we were stunned by how frail and exhausted she looked. Within 2 weeks, we knew she was far too ill to return home to her husband and children. Our lives became centered on keeping Christina safe. We locked away medications. We locked up knives and scissors. We secured dangerous areas of our home. Eventually, we moved a twin bed into our bedroom so she would never be alone at night. We spent evenings watching movies while I gently massaged her head, neck, and back. We were trying to help her quiet the relentless thoughts racing through her mind by offering distractions. She often told us she felt like her life was shattered into pieces on the floor and she didn't know how to begin putting it back together. Between December 2020 and July 2021, Christina spent more than 100 days cumulatively in a behavioral health unit. No one could explain what was happening to our daughter. One of the reasons it took us so long to recognize PMDD was that Christina wasn't suffering all the time. During the follicular phase of her cycle, she was herself again. She could concentrate. She was happy. She was productive. She played tennis. She enjoyed going to parking lot Zumba during COVID. She renewed her nursing license after letting it lapse in 2018 because of what we now know as PMDD. She helped Steve and me with projects, organized much of a bridal shower we both hosted. She participated in both group therapy and private online therapy. And when her children spent 1 weekend each month with us, I saw what a loving and patient mother she was. Because she had these periods of wellness, we weren't recognizing the cyclical nature of her symptoms. The healthy weeks were not evidence that Christina didn't have a serious illness. They were actually one of the biggest clues that she did. During part of each menstrual cycle, she became someone she barely recognized, and then she became herself again. It never had occurred to us to track her menstrual cycle. She hadn't lived with us since 2007 until she came home to us on October 31st, 2020. We were simply trying to help her survive. Then on July 16, 2021, everything changed. After once again admitting Christina to the behavioral health unit because she'd become delusional, Steve and I returned home to an empty house. We looked at the empty twin bed where she had slept for the last few months. And I will add, we never did anything without her permission. Being a 32-year-old woman, we were not going to take over. And so everything had to be done with her approval. We knelt by our bed and we sobbed and we prayed to God, asking, what is it? We had been witnessing her suffering for 9 months. We didn't know what it was. Her doctor didn't know what it was. We wanted to be able to return her to her family. When we finished praying, one thought came clearly to my mind. It occurred to me, I had not seen Christina have a monthly period in our home. That seemed rather strange to me. Then I remembered another thing. When I handed her her cell phone, when I picked her up one day from the behavioral health unit, she mentioned to me that she was updating her period tracking app. As I lay down that night, I experienced something deeply personal for which I will always be grateful. I felt impressed with these simple words: look up menstrual psychosis, a term I'd never heard before. I immediately searched the medical literature and discovered premenstrual dysphoric disorder. As I read the words of women and others living with PMDD, it was as though I was hearing Christina's own voice. The next morning, I called our inpatient psychiatrist. He immediately recognized the significance of what we found and asked us to chart Christina's menstrual cycle. And I realized we already had much of the evidence. Using her period tracking app on her phone and knowing the dates of her admissions and also having witnessed her many symptoms, we created a timeline. The pattern was unmistakable. We always knew Christina didn't have a personality problem, but now we knew for sure she had a biological illness with a cyclical pattern. We finally had an answer. Although we pursued additional treatment, we lost our precious Christina on November 3rd, 2021. In the midst of our heartbreak, we knew we had found our mission. We knew there had to be other women just like her who didn't know they had PMDD and that there were other families desperately searching for answers. We share Christina's story so others won't have to wait all the years for a diagnosis that she waited. We hope that that will change their lives. While we can never know what might have happened, we believe Christina may still be with us today if PMDD had been recognized much earlier. PMDD is real, it is biological, it is severe, and it can be fatal. If our family story helps even one healthcare professional recognize PMDD sooner, then Christina's life will continue to save others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marybeth. So I'll be sharing a little bit later some of all the speakers' contact information, and so you'll be able to follow Marybeth and the organization on social media. So I do want to go back to Dr. Wiener and Shannon. I know that you guys will be talking about some co-occurring concerns. And so it's actually, I do want to mention that it was actually when I saw your presentation at the Women's Conference this past year that it just sort of clicked in my head, like, I don't think that people talk about this as much as it should be talked about. And I don't think people outside of like, behavioral health or medicine even realize that this is a thing. So that's what prompted me to kind of put this little panel together so that we could share the information. So I'm going to push it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Okay, so I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the common coexisting disorders that tend to go with PMDD. One of them being ADHD. So this is something that a lot of research is showing PMDD makes the symptoms of ADHD worse and vice versa. So it's hard to tell, chicken and the egg kind of thing, because they both kind of increase each other. Another one is seasonal affective disorder, which is that depression that we see in certain months of the year. We're very familiar with it here in Ohio. And a lot of people notice that their PMDD symptoms tend to be more severe during a certain time of year when they're experiencing the seasonal depressive disorder. Bipolar disorder is another mental health condition that is strongly linked. There is a strong link between PMDD and bipolar. Sometimes people will experience panic attacks, mood changes, fatigue, many other symptoms that can mirror bipolar disorder. So that is often something that goes hand in hand, as well as depression. Any type of underlying depression or anxiety is very common in PMDD. And if PMDD is not diagnosed or treated, then the depression can worsen. And that is one of the causes that tends to lead to the increase in suicidal ideation and thoughts of harm. And then the last one that is very common is PTSD. PTSD and PMDD frequently occur together. There seems to be a strong link, which Shannon will talk about in a moment, between past trauma and PMDD and how that impacts us.
Absolutely. And so thinking about trauma, there's a lot of ways to link trauma and PMDD. I'll talk about past in a moment, but just thinking about the very in the moment trauma that occurs medically speaking when somebody is consistently looking for help, does not feel right in their body. There's not that attunement going on, and to be frequently dismissed or misdiagnosed or told that you have anxiety and or you're overweight or just any of the excuses that every doctor, it seems like, not let me take that back. Not every doctor, but frequent doctors have certainly, misconstrued that for so many women and menstruating individuals. And so that is absolutely medical trauma is very real. And in terms of past trauma, let's imagine there are so many. I know that they will be talking about misdiagnosis at some point in time. I forget who, I apologize. But imagining individuals who are misdiagnosed with a personality disorder, or maybe bipolar is not present, and yet that's a misdiagnosis. Those are so co-occurring with childhood trauma, whether that's abuse, whether that is neglect. And then imagining as somebody starts their cycle and imagining that childhood trauma is occurring at the same time, what a consistent reminder the rest of your life that not only did that trauma exist, but this physical pain and these intrusive thoughts and these feelings have existed. You're over half of your life, if not more. And so just having that perspective and awareness can be so life-saving and essential. And I will cut myself off now just so we can hear from everyone else as well. But
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So we are going to jump into our next lived experience segment. So in just a second, I will have Dr. Fitzpatrick come on back. But I do want to mention that I actually know Dr. Fitzpatrick we worked at the same behavioral health hospital. And at the time before I even really understood what PMDD was, because we had that experience of working at the behavioral health hospital, I would see individuals coming in psychiatric crises and emergencies. And then I started thinking that what if I actually also had bipolar or some other disorder, because my symptoms were matching other people's, but then it wasn't consistent. And so even if someone, and I think someone will probably touch on this at some point, but even though medical doctors have experience, and even though psychiatric providers have experience, this is just still something that's not very common or talked about. And I think it's just very hard to differentiate it from other disorders. So anyways, sorry, I was just throwing that in there, and I'll let Dr. Fitzpatrick share.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that example in the psych hospital too speaks to just how much we underestimate the impact of cycles, right? So like the thing that I noticed that is real in the psych hospital is the census goes way up on the full moon, right? Like that's a real thing. And and so if you think about just cycles, right? Like that we I think underestimate or dismiss the impact of that on the human body. In our culture at large. So I think that speaks to that too. In terms of my own lived experience, I also, I mean, I relate to a lot of what Marybeth's saying about Christina, because because there is such a contrast in life of being what feels like this really educated and like high performing individual, right? Like Andrea would always joke with me in the hospital, right? Like, when do you sleep, right? Like I was like always working or caring for my kids or in class or all of these things, and then would have these periods of not being able to get out of bed or really high conflict with whoever, right? A friend, a partner, whoever. And I didn't really understand it. And the idea that that conflict would feel, or the depression would feel so significant, and then, a few days later, not feel significant at all was really confusing and frustrating. And as a mental health provider, to not be educated about that, I think adds to this like shame and stigma element that we all feel, I think, around this diagnosis. So I really appreciate, what the Christina Bohn Foundation is doing in just educating people. And I think that's the part that I want to speak on is the hope, I guess, that is there when we learn about it. So I learned that this was a thing from one of my own patients, actually. I was hoping she would come tonight, but she's not here. Because just listening to her, right, and seeing her in all of her, like the totality of her identity, and then in the luteal phase, how different she sounded, how different she felt, and you can feel sort of the extreme nature of that. I went, God, that's maybe I should be tracking my periods, right? Which I started doing and was like, okay, wow, this is really a thing. And then even then continued to be like, well, I guess it's just my period, right? I'm just moody, or it just brings out the worst in me kind of thing. And then finally, just 5 years ago, I'm on Prozac now, which was life changing, just to have a provider say, this is a real thing. This medication can help. I'm a therapist and I'm always in my own therapy and looking for things too. But that kind of validation, right? That support that this is a medical diagnosis was life-changing. And then I was able to communicate that to people around me, right? To educate other healthcare providers, to talk about the correlation between this and ADHD. And now I dropped in the chat, also perimenopause. Now I'm 40. Woo, all of that's so fun. But the ability to talk about that with other people. So then I could say to my partner, hey, I just feel really angry today. There's not a whole lot that you're going to do that's going to make it better, right? We just have to give it time. Like I said, the medication was helpful. Even in, my workplace now, people are educated about it. So it's like if we're extra tearful on a day, like I'm in my luteal phase, right? And then just that, like, oh, okay, like this shared understanding around that comes with education, support, learning how to communicate about your own diagnosis, addressing the stigma of it through just exposure. Like this is a natural thing. Menstruation's a natural thing that women or people who are assigned female at birth go through. And so let's talk about the symptoms and the outcomes of that openly and educate and support each other. So lots and lots of compassion makes my recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to switch back to Marybeth, and she's going to be talking a little bit about misdiagnosis and asking about cycle.
Okay, thank you. Well, Christina wanted to get well. She was trying so hard. For 11 years, she actively sought help. But when we finally figured out it was PMDD, she figured she had it for 15 years, that it started in high school, actually. Her symptoms of profound fatigue, brain fog, high sensitivity, paranoia, depression, feelings of inadequacy and incapability, feelings of guilt and shame, crying spells, for her mutism, self-isolation, looping thoughts, anxiety, and suicidal ideation continued. The life she knew and worked so hard for was slipping away like grains of sand in her hands. She sought answers, and yet she was misdiagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, major depressive disorder, treatment-resistant depression, and other mood disorders. She received numerous medications, psychotherapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and 11 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy. She was so close to receiving the correct diagnosis, but no one connected her symptoms to her menstrual cycle. On October 2nd, 2020, her birthday, Christina admitted herself to a behavioral health unit because she was suicidal. During the night, her period started. The next morning, she told the nurse practitioner she felt dramatically better and asked if she could go home. She had explained, my period started in the night, and I'm feeling so much better. Instead of asking why her symptoms had changed so suddenly or caring that her symptoms had changed so suddenly, the focus remained on treatment-resistant depression, and Christina began electroconvulsive therapy that very day. Months later, in March 2021, I asked one of Christina's inpatient psychiatrists whether her menstrual cycle could be contributing to what we were seeing. The answer was simply no, I don't think so. Then came July 17, 2021. After learning about PMDD in the night, I called Christina in the behavioral health unit. She was clear-minded because she had started her period during the night. I asked her if the nurses documented in her chart when she requested menstrual supplies. No. I asked whether she told her inpatient psychiatrist when she started her period in the hospital. Again, no. I asked why. Her answer has stayed with me ever since. She said she thought telling them she had started her period would be like telling them she had a hamburger for dinner. She didn't think it mattered. Months earlier, she had mentioned her menstrual cycle to a nurse practitioner in Nebraska. Nothing came of it. Later, I had asked her psychiatrist whether her cycle might explain what we were seeing. The answer was no. Somewhere along the way, over the years, Christina received the message that her menstrual cycle had nothing to do with her mental health. She had asked other times over those years. Then she told me something that has shaped our foundation's educational efforts. She said that if someone in the emergency department, when she was admitted for suicide attempts and aborted suicide attempts and for delusions, if anyone in the emergency department had simply asked her 3 questions, they might have recognized PMDD much sooner. Her 3 questions, which we call Christina's questions, are simply these. When was your last period? When are you expecting your next period? And what is PMS like for you? She said, use the term PMS because at that point I never had heard of PMDD. And in my state of being in the ER, I need it to stay simple. She told me she could have easily answered these questions even while in crisis. She always tracked her cycle on her phone. She knew her PMS lasted 2 weeks. They could have said PMS doesn't last 2 weeks. Those answers could have opened the door to considering PMDD. This is not a new concept. In 1984, psychologist Dr. Gordon Hammond told the American Psychological Association that it was no longer ethically appropriate to evaluate women and, as we know, those who no longer do not identify as women, but it was no longer appropriate to evaluate them psychologically without asking whether their symptoms varied with their menstrual cycle. More than 40 years later, too many women and others are still not asked. Today, the menstrual cycle is recognized as an important vital sign because it provides valuable insight into their health, including their mental health. Whenever I speak with nurses, many tell me, oh, now I understand my why. Now I understand why we ask, when was your last period? I would encourage us to take one more step. If a patient requests menstrual supplies in a behavioral health unit, document it. If your patient starts their period during hospitalization, document it. If the symptoms dramatically improve after menstruation begins, document it. These are not insignificant details. They may be some of the most important clinical clues in the entire chart. If we teach patients that their menstrual cycle is clinically important, they will tell us about it. If we unintentionally teach them that it doesn't matter, they will stop mentioning it. Christina had stopped mentioning it. When we finally learned about PMDD, we never felt to blame anyone. We didn't know, they didn't know, but now we do. My hope is that healthcare professionals will start doing some things differently because they know Christina's story. Perhaps they will meet patients who describe severe mood symptoms and will immediately ask about their menstrual cycles. If this leads to a diagnosis for someone, Christina's story will have changed a life. By asking Christina's questions, documenting the date of the last period and when the next period is expected, paying attention to cyclical symptoms, including sudden improvement with the start of the period, PMDD can be recognized earlier. Years of unnecessary suffering will be reduced and lives will be saved. I'd like to add one thing really quick.
Go ahead.
She was going through DBT. And she had DBT therapy for 4 months. And so because it was COVID, there was the weekly Zoom call with the group, the weekly Zoom call with her psychologist, a PhD psychologist. At the 4th month in July, he called her. He was on speaker. I couldn't help but overhear. And he said, so nicely, Christina, I'm not helping you. You keep attempting suicide every month, and you're not supposed to be attempting suicide while on DBT. Then he said, and then there are some weeks where I can tell you're engaged and other weeks where I sense you're faking it and you're just skimming the surface. I wish now that he had thought when he said every month that had pushed a little button in his mind to be thinking cyclically. Every month equals cyclical, but it wasn't caught at the time. I shared that example at a behavioral health meeting. And I was swarmed afterwards by people saying, oh, she never should have been fired. I said, I didn't know. I'm innocently sharing a story. I had no idea that this had repercussions. But so they were telling me what should have happened. But as we learn, we want to share because this is so important. But thank you.
Okay, I dropped the link to your foundation in the chat. So we're going to switch over to our last lived experience story. So Shannon, you're on.
Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to hear everybody else speak so far, so thank you. Transparently, I'm at very much the beginning of this journey. I have tried a medication and it didn't work for me, so I have to go in and try another. And that's okay because I think at least there is awareness, and I'm very grateful for the privilege of having awareness compared to so many people who do not. And I would urge anybody who's considering looking into either self-diagnosing or getting a diagnosis, there are many forms of a safe space. For me, that was counseling. I might be biased as a counselor trainee, but for me, exploring this possibility was in counseling. Others, maybe it is with your GP or your OBGYN or your psychiatrist. But you are deserving of safe space. And I am confident that at some point in time, somebody, if we keep increasing the education surrounding this, will listen, and maybe they won't have the answer, but they'll understand and they'll be able to put those safeguards in for you because you are deserving of that. And I think the other thing that I just wanted to mention, because I know we're wrapping up towards the end, but you are not losing your mind. And I feel like I could get very clinical about everything from all the jargon and I could say everything, but you are not losing your mind, is what I want you to take away from this, because this is not this, you know what's you. And whether you know why you're not you or not in the moment, that's another thing. But you are you, you know when you're you, and you're not losing your mind, is what I just want to leave. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. So we are short on time. I did drop in the chat, though, if anyone had questions, to drop that in. So if you do, feel free to do that. I am going to share just a few things on screen as we're closing up. Okay, so I do want to thank Shanti Orange County, which is Dr. Fitzpatrick's organization, for being a promotional partner. They are from Orange County, California, focused on mental health, social services, and HIV/AIDS support. So you can find them on, that is their website, also on social media. And if you have any questions, there is an email address there as well. So the foundation that we talked about for Christina, is there's a lot of ways to get in touch with Marybeth. And so, as we said, this organization helps advocate and educate people. There is a Memorial 5K run that is coming up. So again, you can either screenshot this or I will email it out to everybody so everybody will have it available. And lastly, I do want to thank Serenity Counseling Solutions, which is Dr. Wiener's organization, her counseling office. They offer safe and comfortable space for individuals, couples, families, and groups that are navigating life's challenges. So you can find, excuse me, you can find them on social media as well as their website address there. So I do want to remind everyone of the 988 crisis lifeline, and that I will have resources going out by email. There are a few resources that I do want to take a minute to share. So the first is Rachel's book, which she talked about during her segment. So it's called From Cursed to Cured. It is available on Amazon, and it does talk about charting your waking temperature, talking about specific ways to measure progesterone. So focusing on the information that she's sharing to others as far as getting help, but then also talking about her experience as well. There is another book that's maybe not specific to PMDD, but it is written by an ND and was recommended by an ND. So an ND is a naturopathic doctor. And so I did ask Dr. Fitzpatrick at the beginning, where does she recommend starting? And so really what saved me was having an ND, which is a naturopathic doctor. So having a naturopathic doctor was someone who was more open to hearing about things that were a little bit more, maybe not as conventional or not as common. So being in psychology, I figured out what PMDD was and brought that to her. And so she agreed, and that's how I was able to start getting treatment. So this is a book written by an ND focused on just sort of periods and menstrual in general, but can also be helpful. But they talk about hormones and sort of holistic treatment. There are some websites that are recommended as well. Some of these were recommended by Dr. Wiener, some by the ND that I know as well. So this information, again, will be sent out in the email links. All right. I stopped sharing, correct? Because I had a little bit of a snafu there. Okay. So I don't think that there are any questions. So I believe that we are going to go ahead and close out, but we are going to close out in a prayer. So I'm going to ask Marybeth to jump on and do that for us. So if anyone would like to stay on to do that, I'll pass it over to you, Marybeth.
And thank you. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for so many things. We know that in spite of the severity of symptoms of PMDD, that there are still things to be thankful for doctors, nurses, for caring therapists, psychologists, so many people who want to help, so many people who are trying to learn as quickly as they can so that they can be helpful. And we pray that thou wilt please bless those who are suffering, that they can find answers, that things will start to fall into their laps, that bits of information, resources, people they can contact that would lead them to answers for them. We pray that thou wilt be with them and their loved ones. And we pray for support and for healing in family relationships, as there can be so many misunderstandings, so many misperceptions. And we pray that families will turn toward those in their own families who are suffering and want to embrace them and help them. We pray for thy guidance and for thy love. And these things we pray for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much. And so because we didn't really have time for questions, if anyone does have questions, then again, everybody's contact information will be sent out. If nothing else, you're welcome to email me and I will get that question to the individual. So thank you so much for joining us. And please follow up with the resources because we want to be able to spread as much education and information as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. This is